What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and it occurred to me that we never finished Annihilation Conquest. We covered the first story where Star-Lord basically blew up a world, but that was basically it. So, yes, this video is titled The Return of Adam Warlock. That's not the surprising ending. The ending of this story, the ending is absolutely nuts. I'm gonna leave you on a cliffhanger. Come on, guys, you should expect it by now. And don't tell me you hate it, I know you love it. But here's the thing. The basis behind Annihilation Conquest, like we covered in the first video that we did with Star-Lord, which we'll have a playlist down in the description, so it's all kind of nice and organized and you can easily keep up with everything, that was basically a story that showed us that the Phalanx, this group that kind of existed out there in Marvel Comics for years, that they're launching their attack. The funny thing about this, and the surprise we'll get at the end, they're being led by someone, and it's really, really cool. So the idea behind the Phalanx is what they do, and we'll kind of find this out in the next video as well. They're launching an attack and they're just conquering world after world. Now what this does is it initially picks up with a guy named Blastar. Now this requires a little bit of explanation here, because in the Annihilation event, the one that came before this, that what you had was basically Annihilus and his forces from the Negative Zone, which included Blastar, invading the main Marvel universe, and they almost conquered it, right? They defeated Galactus, they defeated the Silver Surfer. I mean, like basically everybody fell before them. To give you guys some perspective, man, and again, we'll have Annihilation in the playlist as well. To give you guys some perspective, man, that story opens up, right? Like the first page of the story is literally Star-Lord, Peter Quill, Richard Rider, and a handful of other people just fleeing for their fucking lives, right? Just trying to live. That's literally how this story opens. It's amazing. But the thing about this is that Blastar is one of the few people from the Negative Zone who remained here after the events of Annihilation concluded and Annihilus was defeated and sent back to his own realm. And so Blastar, of course, like many other people here, these grudges, these warring races who would all normally fight each other, all that goes away in the face of just this overwhelming force of the Phalanx showing up. And their attack on Hala, that's brazen, man, right? It's like that movie Red Dawn when like the Russians and the North Koreans attacked the United States, right? Just a brazen maneuver, like damn, that's basically what this is, right? Because to keep in mind here, right, to give you guys perspective, the Cree at one point in Marvel Comics conquered Earth, which has the most powerful beings in the universe on it, right? So when it comes to how powerful and how capable the Kree are, they're not a race to be slept on. But the fact that they're just getting absolutely melted, right? Just being steamrolled by the Phalanx, this says something, man. It says how powerful these guys are. And so that's just kind of the struggle that goes on here. Now, even Blastar himself, as capable as he is, this guy falls to the power of the Phalanx. And so what we end up doing is switching over to Phylla-Vell. Now, Phylla-Vell is a character that we haven't really talked about in Marvel, but I promise you guys, the day she gets introduced to the MCU, man, son, this girl's an absolute demon. She's currently Quasar. She basically took the role that was taken over by Wendell Vaughn, or at least used by Wendell Vaughn at one previous point in time. But what she's doing is basically explaining all of this to Adam Warlock. Now, we will talk about how we got to this kind of situation, but what she says here is that the Phalanx is a highly contagious and hyper-aggressive techno-organic species of unknown derivation, and it's taken over, right? Weeks ago, in a matter of hours, the entire Kree galaxy became its latest conquest. Now, what she also says is, as far as we know, all Kree worlds have suffered the same fate. Their populations are trapped and enslaved. The Phalanx has infected everything it's invaded. All technology, it is everywhere. The Kree know they should be afraid. They know they should run or fight back, but it's impossible to resist an enemy that has invaded you. That's what the Phalanx does. It removes everything except obedience. It removes will, love, bonds of family, and duty. So basically the Phalanx is Reddit, but the Phalanx is numbness. The Phalanx is submission. Countless Kree have been put to work as a labor force to keep society running. The rest, millions more, are being processed. Processing does three things. It identifies those rare individuals with special talents or powers that can be recruited to the select, the elite servants of the Phalanx. Processing also studies every captive mind, in turn harvesting data. The Phalanx are systematically searching for something. For what, we don't know, but they are hungry for knowledge. The third thing processing does is it disassembles organisms at a molecular level. The Phalanx, you see, need a constant supply of fuel. So that's literally it, right? Like, one, individuals who are highly capable, they become part of the select, right? They're elite fighting force. Those individuals who basically serve no useful purpose to the Phalanx, they're literally turned into food, right? But they also have these what are called Babel spires. These spires that exist out there on these different worlds that actually create this kind of like enormous shield barrier, which is how the Phalanx are able to keep these different worlds protected. Now, while Phylla-Vell's explaining this, she's also accompanied by Moondragon, also known as Heather Douglas. Now, Heather Douglas was not always a literal dragon, right? That was not always the case. Instead, what's happened during Annihilation Conquest is Heather Douglas, who was actually the daughter of Drax the Destroyer, she kind of had this crazy story arc going on where she was at one point prophesized to be like the dragon of the moon and that kind of a thing. In essence, it's like her final form, if you want to call it that, right? She's kind of been transmogrified into a literal dragon. It's one of these things where Dan Abnett, who was writing the story, was kind of experimenting with ways to elevate and change her character, because Heather Douglas had basically been the bald moon dragon for decades in Marvel Comics, right? Up until the time this story was written, it was something like 40 years. She'd basically just looked the same and been the same. So it was the desire to kind of change things up, which was cool. But what this also does is it shows us that Adam Warlock has been restored. Now, here's the backside of the story that isn't necessarily covered here. And it's technically a tie-in, but we're not going to cover the whole thing. The idea behind this is that when the Kree invasion first started, that Phylla-Vell and Moondragon were basically contacted by a being that they didn't recognize. They didn't know who it was, but this person was talking to them on a telepathic level. And what this person was saying is, you have to go find him. You have to go find the being that's going to basically solve everything, the savior, the only one who can bring this conflict to an end. You have to find that individual person. We didn't know who he was. It wasn't until we got to the end of the Phylla-Vell story that we found out that it was Adam Warlock. But here's the caveat to this. One, the person that was communicating with Phylla-Vell was actually the Supreme Intelligence, right? The leader, the kind of religious leader and even just like political leader of the Cree. But it was sending out that message to Phylla-Vell because, one, she would be receptive to it, and two, she would know where to find this guy. But the other caveat here is that Adam Warlock was woken up too soon. For those of you guys who aren't really familiar with the character of Adam Warlock, and that's fine, right? I'll explain it to you guys. Adam Warlock is one of these guys where after any kind of a major conflict or when he's needed or something along those lines, usually whenever he sustains like massive injuries or something, he'll go into a cocoon and he'll basically stay there, right? It's Marvel's way of just kind of writing him out of the Marvel universe until they need him again. And then, hey, this cocoon popped up in this like hotel room during Infinity Gauntlet. And here's Adam Warlock. So cool, he's part of the story now. And like, that's it, right? That's really how it works. But it's one of those things where he emerges from his cocoon like a caterpillar emerging as a butterfly. It happens when it's supposed to happen. The reality here is Phylla-Vell snatching up the cocoon of Adam Warlock and waking him up. She did it too early, which means his mind isn't necessarily ready for it. His memories aren't necessarily restored, and his power is not at 100%. But this is kind of a crazy thing because as they're talking, Phylla-Vell is feeding him all this information, and even Moondragon uses her telepathic abilities to speak directly to Adam Warlock and even show him what it is that they've seen. The only thing that Adam Warlock really recalls is that he says he came to this place because he was in pain. He says, yes, now I remember there were souls screaming at me, screaming in my head. They wouldn't stop. There were so many. I started to write their names down. I think there must have been a terrible war. What he's referencing is the Annihilation conflict, right? The event that came before this one. But before there's really even any time to explain, the truth about this is he kind of wakes up. He doesn't know who anybody is. He doesn't know who Phylla-Vell is because in reality, the last time that he was kind of roaming around, Phylla-Vell wasn't around. He didn't know who she was, right? She didn't exist in Marvel Comics at the time. And so the result of that is Moondragon knows who he is, but he doesn't recognize Moondragon, one, because she doesn't look the same, and two, because his memories are gone. And so Adam Warlock in this situation doesn't trust anybody. He's like, I don't trust you. I don't trust anybody else. What I need are answers. I need to go to the only person in this universe that I recognize, that I know, the only person that I'm familiar with at the moment. So he literally snatches up Phylla-Vell and Moondragon, intends to take off. But in the middle of that, they're attacked by the Phalanx. Now, again, this is one of those things where this is seemingly what the Phalanx were looking for, or at least a target they were hunting for, because Adam Warlock being being converted into one of their select, I mean, that's a whole host of power. You're talking about a guy who could go toe-to-toe with Thanos, right? I mean, Adam Warlock is ridiculously powerful in Marvel Comics. He's more like, whenever you see him, he's really more of like a prophet. You don't really see him fight all that often. It's more of him just kind of being in a leadership position, everybody recognizing how significant he is, and he's kind of like the Captain America of the universe, right? If there is such a thing. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, Adam Warlock's here, everybody stop, let's listen to him, let's see what he has to say, and everybody shuts up, right? It's that kind of a situation. And so the reality here is, having him as a select, his fighting prowess, his access to cosmic energies, it would beef up the capabilities of the Phalanx several times over, right? Like by an order of magnitude. It would be pretty nuts. Like it's crazy how powerful they would become. And so as a result, seeking Adam Warlock and snatching him up, that's their goal. Now the reality here is, the forces of the Phalanx as they're here, they're being overcome relatively fast. And in fact, there is a fight that breaks out between what's basically Shatterax, a member of the Phalanx, and Adam Warlock. And it is a pretty cool moment, right? Like literally Shatterax is like, will you surrender? And Adam Warlock's like, and who would I be surrendering to? And this guy's like, I am Shatterax, I am select. Will you surrender to me, or do I have to damage you first? And the response of Adam is, what makes you think you can? And like, sends this guy flying. So it's kind of an amazing moment. But the reality here is, realizing that they're overwhelmed and the forces of the Phalanx will just keep coming endlessly, Adam Warlock grabs himself, Phyla-Vell, and Moondragon, and they basically teleport out. They fly to a local star and to a base on that star in order to basically figure out what their next move is going to be. Now, once they arrive there, right, it's the heart of Terma's star is what is referred to. Once they arrive there, it's basically a kind of secret enclave where you have a person that's effectively working on things, right? That's working on building stuff up and evolving people and so on and so forth. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Because when they get there, Adam Warlock is like, these people that you see here, these are what are called new Cree. He's like, but the new Cree is a project that has not been productive so far. These are imperfect examples, the consequences of unsuccessful experimentation. And so where Phyla-Vell asks the question, who has done this? This voice seemingly comes out of nowhere and says, so you have come back to me, my son. You have returned to the High Evolutionary. And the response of Adam Warlock is, yes, High Evolutionary, I've returned to you. Now, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with the relationship between the two, there's a big history between Herbert Wyndham and Adam Warlock. There's a huge amount of history there. When the High Evolutionary refers to Adam Warlock as his son, he's not really talking about creator and created. That's not really what he's referring to. Adam Warlock was created by the Enclave, right? Just a group on Earth that wanted to conquer the Earth through technological means, right? It involved the Fantastic Four and a few different things, so Adam Warlock ultimately escaped. He basically snatched up Sif from the Asgardian mythos, tried to marry her. Thor and Adam Warlock got into a fight because Thor was like, hey, that's my girl. You can't be snatching up my girl trying to marry her. That's not cool, man. She's got me, get out of here, that kind of a thing. But there came a point when Adam Warlock basically ended up visiting with and really just kind of meeting with the High Evolutionary. The reason for this is because the High Evolutionary had created an alternate Earth called Counter-Earth that was literally on the other side of the sun. And the idea behind this is that on that Earth was basically a guy called Man-Beast. This was back in the early days of Adam Warlock's stories, where he was kind of presented to us as more of a Jesus, like a messianic kind of character in Marvel Comics. So of course it was a great big huge fight. Adam Warlock was crucified, so on and so forth. But the big thing behind this, and the reason why the relationship between the two is so significant, is because the Soul Stone, as it was given to Adam Warlock, was given to him by the High Evolutionary. So that's kind of where that comes from, right? That's why their history is so strong. So again, it's really one of those interesting moments, because what you end up doing is switching back over to the Select from the Phalanx, right? These forces that had been sent to capture Adam Warlock. And the reality here is that in their failure, they're forced to confront their master, the guy who's running the Phalanx at the moment right now. And I'm curious to see if any of you guys are going to guess before I present who this is. Here's what I want you to do. Post a comment down below and tell me who you think it is that's running the Phalanx, right? Before I get to this part, tell me who you think it is. Honor system, right? Don't wait for me to reveal it and then type your comment. I know some of you guys probably would, but like honor system here, right? who do you think it is? But in these guys meeting with their master, right? Like, one of the things that's first established here is that failure is completely and totally unacceptable. So one of the select are destroyed as an example to the others, right? Do not fail me again, or I will keep eradicating each of you. And then quite literally, this guy says, select Zenmu, right? This guy's a character that's been around in Marvel Comics for a long time and was kind of like a Hulk type character. It's a weird thing. It doesn't really matter. But literally it says select Shatterax, right? Learn from Korath's error. The Phalanx will not tolerate failure. I will not tolerate failure. I see it is time for me to take a physical form again. I need to deal with this Warlock personally on behalf of the entire Phalanx. For I am the Phalanx, and the Phalanx is my will made flesh. And with Warlock at my side, the Kree Empire will be but the first to fall to me. The person running the Phalanx is none other than Ultron. Now, the question that I'm sure you guys are undoubtedly going to have is, Rob, how did Ultron end up taking over the Phalanx? Don't worry, we will get an answer to that question, and it's really, really cool because honestly, it's all the Avengers' fault. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.